This week, my Bible had to undergo an operation, surgical repair. Wood glue works wonders, and it's now ready to live a little longer. But it is nice. I'm probably going to be one of those guys. I know that you can flip it up on your phone, and I know you can highlight a text in there. But there is something for me of just being able to write, underline, do all kinds of things in my Bibles. And I get them I've had this one since, I think, 2019. And my goal, and I put this out there, my goal is ultimately that I would go through enough Bibles that I can be able to give each one to a kid of mine as they can remember what their dad wrote in his Bible and just look through it and be able to have that. And so I'm a little concerned about some of the earlier iteration versions, and so I have to keep going, and that way I can just do the final 5 that I get through. Who knows what theology was in the first ones as I was trying to figure it out. I remember I had an NIV study Bible that, man, I loved yellow highlighter. And I mean, it was like just yellow highlighter all over the place. And doesn't make it easy to read afterwards because you're just like this bright yellow pages as you open it up. So that's probably not one that I'm going to pass on. So I've got to make sure that I get enough copies ready for them. But I would commend you to know your word and to be in the word and to be, there are times where I don't remember a reference, but I know it's on the left-hand side halfway down. And I'm like, left-hand side, okay. I really thought it was at the beginning of the book. Then there it is, and I find it. And so God's word is something that is to be precious. And as we sang that Holy, Holy, Holy song again, that is a song that the church has sung. And just the idea that the seraphim and cherubim fall down before him. Like those are the most powerful beings in the universe, in the created, known, spiritual world, physical world. And when they look at him, they're in so much awe and wonder that they just constantly fall down and worship. How much more so should our posture before the Lord be that kind of awe and worship? And sometimes we can become so familiar with a book and we figure we've got it down, and yet our hearts don't stay pricked to the sensitiveness of the grandeur of our God. And so I pray that you would continue to be enamored by the God who has pursued you and demonstrated his love for you on the cross and invited you into a relationship. I pray that that continues to animate everything that you do, that it drives you in the way that you live out the expression of your life and the confidence with which you face realities. This morning we get to be in 1 Samuel chapter 3, and it's a favorite of many as you think about who this one was who would play such a prominent role in the life of the nation of Israel. We've gone through the first couple chapters where we met a barren woman who was able to, by God's grace, have this child, and she dedicated him to the Lord, and she has, by chapter 1, left him there and praising the Lord in chapter 2, lifting up her heart, and then coming to visit that young child as that young child continues to grow in wisdom and knowledge with the Lord and with the priestly order that he's serving alongside of, even as last week we were introduced to the sons who were an absolute mess. Chapter 2, that's one of those that if they ever made a movie of it, you'd have to gloss that one really quick if you want to keep the audience broad. It's a mess. And God, in the midst of the mess, has been working. And we saw that last week in the way that he was doing that. And so this week, we kind of get that next step where Samuel is invited into the process. And so the message is simply called The Call. And so if you have your place, if you would stand, let's read chapter 3 and see what God has to say for us today. Starting in verse 1, Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord before Eli. And the word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were infrequent. It happened at that time as Eli was lying down in his place. Now his eyesight had begun to grow dim, and he could not see well. And the lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. Yet the Lord called to Samuel, and he said, Here I am. Then he ran to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call you. Lie down again. So he went and lay down. The Lord called yet again, Samuel. So Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he answered, I did not call you, my son. Lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, nor had the word of the Lord yet been revealed to him. So the Lord called Samuel again for the third time. And he arose, and he went to Eli, and he said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli discerned that the Lord was calling the boy. And Eli said to Samuel, Go lie down, and it shall be, if he calls you, that you shall say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Then the Lord came and stood and called as the other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. The Lord said to Samuel, Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. In that day I will carry out against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from the beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons brought a curse on themselves, and he did not rebuke them. Therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever. So Samuel lay down until morning, and he opened the doors of the house of the Lord, but Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. Samuel said, I'm not here. Goodbye. No, that's not what he said. And he said, Here I am. He said, What is the word that he spoke to you? Please do not hide it from me. May God do so to you and more also if you hide anything from me of all the words that he spoke to you. So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And he said, It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him. Thus Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fail. All Israel from Dan even to Beersheba knew that Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, because the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord. Father, I ask that you would help us this morning to see the way that you work and the way that we are called to respond. I thank you for the life of Samuel. I thank you for the way that you brought him to this moment, for the way that he responded in obedience, and for the way that you were able to use his life. Father, we all are called into your family. We are all called into being a part of the body of Christ, and we are all called then to hear your voice and to respond in the way that you would have us to serve out this life as a reflection of you to this world. And so may we see ourselves even in this moment, in this passage. And may you speak to us in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to kind of go back through the story just a little bit and then kind of give us some points to run with. The first thing I want to kind of look at is the current conditions. We have been looking at the current conditions for several chapters now, both from a microscopic kind of look at the life of Elkanah and Hannah, and then kind of the macro picture of what that might look like in light of the nation of Israel. We've looked at it from the priests, and now we are looking at it again in verse 1, kind of a big picture kind of thing. Chapter 2 ends with a prophetic word that someone was coming to rise in the replacement of the failed priests and leadership of Eli's house. And so chapter 3 opens with the question, who will that be? And chapter 3 verse 1 says, and there was a guy named Samuel. There was a kid, Samuel. And so we have this scene cut away, and the next person mentioned being Samuel, and he is doing what he is supposed to do, ministering before the Lord and before Eli. It says in this passage that the word was rare. The word was rare, and visions were infrequent. If you look at the context of what's going on in their communities, in the priestly order, would you expect anything different? This was the people who were already kind of working against the Lord that had rescued them and had delivered them. You have these priests who are doing all of these things that are kind of listed in chapter 2. They weren't listening to men, much less rather to the Lord. They weren't looking for Him, much less were they even willing to listen if He were to have spoken. The word of the Lord is rare. Now, that doesn't mean that there were only a couple copies of the Torah or the law of these books that were kind of assembled. That probably was the case because there weren't lots of copies. There weren't printing presses and all that kind of stuff. So there were scrolls and limited access. But that's not what it's talking about. It's not talking about copies of the Bible. It's talking about the Lord speaking into lives and leading the nation. Being that one whom gives His direction so that the people of the nation have confidence in the direction that they are to go and how they are to walk. He was letting them kind of in a Romans chapter 1 model kind of just go after these things, following after these things. And so here is a moment that in chapter 2 we have a rare voice speaking in, and it's coming in to speak judgment. And now again we set the stage for the Lord to speak. Verse 2, it says, and at that time Eli was lying down in his place. And it adds a comment about his eyesight. He is old, the last chapter, and his eyes are failing. Eli's physical condition matches his spiritual condition. This is a moment in which you see a man who has been reduced to someone who, instead of being the spiritual model, the trendsetter, was anything but the shining example. His eyes were dulled by sin spiritually, and his physical eyes by age. And we have, as he is laying down to rest, the lamp of God has not yet gone out, and Samuel is over near the Ark of the Covenant, laying down. Now, he's not in the Holy of Holies. No one would have gone in there, and they definitely wouldn't have slept in there, but he was right there, maybe outside of that, tending to the needs of the temple or the tabernacle. There was a command that was given in Exodus 27 and in Leviticus 24 about how that there was a lamp that was to be lit. And that was part of the recognition that the Lord's presence was sustained even throughout the night that He was there. And so you have this moment where this light is representing the fact that God's presence is not yet gone. There is a symbol of hope and light, even though Eli's eyes are dim and the state of Israel is very dire. God is at work, and before all hope is lost, God would speak. This is the moment into which God now enters to speak. Verse 4 through 14, you have the divine call. Verse 4, it says, the Lord called to Samuel, and He said, here I am. And He runs to Eli and says, here I am, for you called me. And Eli's response, I did not call you. Go lay down again. So he goes and lays down. I find it really encouraging here from Samuel's perspective, hearing so clearly a voice. He gets up and believing it must be Eli, he runs to Eli. Like the word that's used, he runs. Like he gets up, this is late, and he's like, well, I heard him. I got to get there. What is it, Master? What do you need? What am I supposed to do? He goes and responds as quickly as he knows how to do. He is ready and quick to be obedient. It demonstrates a humility, an urgency, a readiness to obey. And so Samuel is met by someone who's probably a little groggy and can't see real well. I didn't do that. Go lay back down. 3 times this happens, right? 3 times this happens. And at some point, if you've ever had a child who keeps coming into your room, it can get a little irksome. I am trying to sleep. But Eli, after the 3rd time, after it repeats with the same outcome and no resolution, finally we have this moment where Eli catches on. But there's this interesting verse before you get there in verse 7. It says, why is this happening? It says, now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, nor had the word of the Lord yet been revealed to him. What does that mean? Right? This is actually the same words that are used of Hophni and Phinehas in chapter 2. They did not know the Lord, nor the customs of the priests. But what is the context here? You see, Samuel has never experienced the Word of God personally like this before. He's grown up with the traditions. He's learned the protocols. He knows what he's supposed to do. He has the obedience. He is trusting in this. He's growing in favor and wisdom. He's been surrounded by it, but he did not yet have a personal knowledge of the Lord speaking. Now, in the case of Hophni and Phinehas, they had a testimony that had been presented to them over and over again, and they had disregarded it and dismissed it. But in Samuel's case, this was an ignorance from lack of personal encounter. The system and the structure he was practicing under the direction of Eli, but the relationship with the Lord that yielded a conviction and a clarity on spiritual matters was only now being introduced. And so, here comes number 3. It happens again, and Samuel says, next time, son, that it happens, don't come running to me. Just stay there and ask the Lord to speak. Eli figures it out and discerns finally that something more significant is happening. Something's happening in the life of Samuel. And so Eli opens Samuel his experience to another voice, the voice of the Lord. This is something that Samuel had never seen modeled. This was something new. He was at least aware, this Eli, to know that the Lord still speaks. Chapter 2, he had already had a word from the Lord come. It wasn't good. And so we don't necessarily see how Eli responds to that first word, but in this second one, we see that Eli was at least knowledgeable enough that God was speaking. And so Eli sends Samuel back with a language of response and the instruction to lay in wait. In verse 10, look what it says. It says, the Lord came and stood and called another time, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, speak, your servant is listening. Samuel once again is visited, but this time he remains in the room long enough and now in a posture to hear. The Lord comes and stands. God chose to make his presence palpable. His presence, not just his voice, was coming to Samuel. Samuel lies eagerly, maybe a bit nervously, to listen. Regardless his countenance, he does as his earthly master had instructed him, and he's ready to meet his heavenly master. And the Lord speaks. And if you look at what he speaks, it's very similar to what had just been spoken over them in chapter 2. The demise of Eli's family. Now, how about that for some first words? I remember when I was in my first pastorate, I had a youth minister, and First day on the job, I call him into my office. He tells me later that he was waiting to have the words from heaven on high brought through me to him to launch this ministry. Instead, as I had pulled into the church that morning, I had noticed that his truck was parked under the carport to the main entrance of the building. And I thought, that's an odd place to park your truck. How does someone get here? What does a UPS man do? Do you really just leave it sitting there? And so my first words were, is that your truck underneath the carport? Yes. Can you move it? Does it need to be there? There's only first words once. And that kind of... Samuel, first words, I'm going to bring destruction upon the guy that you've been looking up to these years, who's become your really earthly father in so many ways, your family. I'm going to basically wipe them out. That doesn't sound really pleasing, exciting. That's like, you're going to hear from God tonight. Go lay down. He's going to destroy everything. Great. And yet, it's the message that he has given. And so he lays down, and the change now begins to take place. Verse 15. He lays down, and he really doesn't want to see Eli. And so instead of the, here I am, run to you, the awkwardness is felt. Samuel's perspective of his master has been tarnished. The man that maybe has been projected as whatever is no longer the model that he is to seek after, because it is someone who is now under the condemnation of God. This Samuel does not understand Eli to be the same man that he thought he knew. The harder realities of that generational failure and the need for a new direction bring a brokenness and embarrassment, maybe even a fear to address him. And yet, here is this moment where Eli calls to him and asks him, and Samuel goes. And so now this father figure, who is now a flawed father figure, must now have his junk recounted again, and now by someone closer. It's one thing to have the man of God just show up on your doorstep and say, I have a message from the Lord, here it is, goodbye. It's another thing to have someone that you are raising up know that same truth. If you've ever been in that circumstance where you can be, maybe it's something you struggle with at work or whatever, and you have maybe a supervisor bring you in and make mention of something, but then when it becomes commonly known that you were the one that caused all the trouble, that image is tarnished. This is what's happened to Eli in the eyes of Samuel. And so here, Samuel now must face him. And it is as if Eli can see that Samuel's a little nervous, because he looks at him and says, what did he speak? Do not hide it from me, and may God do to you and more so if you hide anything of the words. Now, at that point, you're going, okay, well, you're going to get destroyed, so what's worse? Right? So now Samuel is on the hook, and he confesses everything. It says that he spoke everything to him, hid nothing from him. Now, it seems that Eli, I don't know why Eli is so aggressive about wanting to know. I think, okay, maybe if he can get another word of the Lord, that guy that came in off the streets was a lunatic, and he had the wrong perspective, and now Samuel, whom he likes and trusts, might have a different word, and let's go with that word. Replacement, right? We don't want it necessarily confirmed, so we'd rather replace it with something else. Or maybe it's something totally new. Give me something else to look forward to and hear about. And yet, when he hears it, he experiences the full weight of it. Samuel responds, and in so doing, Eli is able to do two things for this young Samuel. He allows Samuel to understand that this indeed was the Lord's word. This was indeed what the Father had said, right? So that's important, because Samuel's trying to figure out who is this one speaking. Now, this message that came to him unbeknownst to him, now is over here being confirmed through this other one. Okay, this is the Lord at work. And so now Samuel's understanding that this is how the Lord speaks and shares and gives him information. And at the same time, Samuel, by delivering these words to Eli now is confronted with the very real reality and certainty that things are changing, that his sons are going to perish, that his line is going to suffer. He comes back and says, "For I told him that I am about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons brought the curse on themselves, and he did not rebuke them." Eli understands. And so we have the transition. Verse 19. Samuel grows, the Lord is with him. Lets none of his words fail. And everybody, from the top to the bottom, starts to understand that there's something different about Samuel. The Lord has appeared and has spoken. This transition is now ready. The Lord has elevated this young Samuel before the people. What Samuel was doing and speaking, the Lord was confirming. It seems that not only would Samuel be a mouthpiece for the Lord, but whatever Samuel did, the Lord was confirming. And so they were working together in this ministry that God was bringing about. God was bringing favor into the life of Samuel, into the things that he would say. So from the beginning to the end of the chapter, Samuel moves from a religious knowledge to a divine appointment. He moves from muted service to hearing God's voice, from being naive in what the Lord is doing to be an active participant in what God is doing. The hearts of the people are being transitioned. They're now opened to a new leadership. The previous leadership is being ousted, both in their influence and in their presence. The word of the Lord, which was rare at the beginning, now God is beginning to speak through this one Samuel. God is raising up another to walk before him in a way that would provide positive spiritual influence, direction, and understanding for a nation. So let me bring it home with a couple points. Throughout this passage, there are so many things, takeaways. The first thing is this: are you posturing yourself, or are you postured to hear the Lord speak to you? Are you postured to hear the Lord speak to you? Verse 1. They were in a place where the word of the Lord was rare because the people's hearts and the priests' hearts were far from the Lord. Are you in a place yourself where you would demonstrate a desire to hear, a willingness to listen, and a lifestyle that would obey if the Lord were even to speak? Are you postured to hear him? Eli's sons had demonstrated that they were unwilling and disinterested, and it plagued the nation. So what about you? How do you posture yourself? Do you come to a church service? Do you open up the Word and expect the Lord to use His Word in your life, to speak into your life? Do you start to take the things around you, and in the language of experiencing God, let those things speak into, like the circumstances, the church, prayer, the Scriptures? Do you let those things be works of the Holy Spirit that He is actually speaking, or do you have a disinterest and a disconnect from them? Are you postured to see God at work around you? That was huge for us as we went through that Experiencing God study. Or would you say, in your own life, the word of the Lord is rare? Experiences with God aren't really happening. The question is, what is your posture? The second thing, do you run too quickly to others when you're wondering if and how the Lord is at work? Over and over again, Samuel hears something and immediately runs to Eli. My question to you is, are you willing and able to sit long enough to hear from God instead of running to others for confirmation immediately and fleshing it out? Samuel, on the third attempt, finally stays in the room long enough to listen to God. You know, sometimes the best thing that I can do as a pastor is not answer someone's question immediately. not fix their problem, not give them the direction. Because what I do is I create a dependence on me to supply those things. And in this case, Eli pushes him back finally and says, no, listen to the Lord. You see, there are things that we need to sit with the Lord and let Him speak to us about. And the question is, how well do we do that? How well do you sit long enough to let God speak into your circumstances? Are we seeking a word from a friend, or are we seeking a word from the Lord? We might offer confirmation, but it's the Lord's word that has to be given to be confirmed. So do you spend enough time to let the Lord give you direction first and then have it confirmed? Or do you just look for someone to tell you and to basically live your life with God through someone else? Third thing, do you know the Lord? Or do you only know religion and tradition? Samuel was growing up, and he got to this moment, and the scripture says he did not know the Lord. He did not have that connection that he understood the voice of the Lord speaking in his life. He did not see that connection. And guess what? We very easily can be in this room and go through all the motions and learn what we're supposed to do. When we sit, when we stand, when we do this, when we do that. How much we give, what class we go to, how we go on missions. Like, we can go through all of those things, and if we don't have a relationship with the Lord, those things are simply religious rituals and rites and traditions and activities. And so the question for all of us must be, are those things a byproduct of a relationship with the Lord? Or are they somehow being substituted for intimacy with Him? Samuel has to come to that moment before he's ever launched into the ministry that he's given. He has to know that he is speaking with the Lord, that the Lord is engaging with him before he's ever going to go out and confidently face a Saul or be able to call a David or be able to do the other stories that he has in there. And so as you think about living out your faith walk, are you living it out in a confidence that the Lord is leading you and guiding you? Or are you basically just trying to hold it together and keep some religion going so you can keep living in a direction that you want to go? Samuel's trajectory gets substantially redirected at this point, and his life becomes a life of impact. And that's the opportunity for us as well. The fourth question is this: what things is the Lord bringing into your life? Or what things is He bringing you into, giving you knowledge of? Verses 11 through 14, this is a moment in which the Lord kind of pulls back the veil, not on the Holy of Holies, but on the circumstances that are going on in the temple. And this is, for all accounts, really the first time that Samuel is being exposed to what God is doing. Right? Eli has gotten that message, but Samuel is still clueless. And so here's a moment where Samuel is being brought into it because God is involving him now in the next steps. Let me ask you that question. What are the things that you're hearing about, that you're finding out about? Because it very well may be that those are things that God is bringing you into and He's prepared you for so that you might be a part of what happens in them. It is not by chance that you might find out about a neighbor's struggles. And it may be that you're the one that God has placed on that street so that you can be the ministry of the gospel to that person during that time. There may be something going on at work and you kind of come to find out about it, and it's because God is raising you up to be someone who lives a life of integrity and handles that situation rightly and wisely and addresses that. What are the things that are in your sphere that God has allowed to come into your sphere? These very well may be things that He's inviting you into to be a presence of the gospel in. For Samuel, it was seeing a changing of the guard. He was maybe on this trajectory. I'm over here. I'm just learning how to do these things. And now he's finding out, oh, God is finishing up over here. He's doing a new work. I wonder if Eli added the rest of the lines of the first man's words back to Samuel. Oh, and by the way, God went on and told me that he was raising up somebody else. Or if it was in the back of Eli's head, oh, I'm putting two and two together. I can see what God is doing here. What are the things that the Lord is allowing you to be a part of? The beauty of the body of Christ is that when we leave here, we go to all different kinds of places. And we have all different kinds of opportunities to participate in the life of Christ in those places. I can't be everywhere. You can't be everywhere. But as we go out, we are many places to minister the gospel. And so the final question is this: how are you responding in obedience? Allowing the Lord's work to be perceived and received through your obedience. Samuel, as he relays this message, it is recognized that the Lord is with him. And then as he speaks, the Lord continues to work through him. And so do people see when you are sharing life, when you are living out the gospel, are they perceiving that God is helping you in that moment shepherd them? Do they see the work of the Lord in you and through you? There are times where you may have had someone speak into your life and you go, man, it's as if God was giving a word to that person. Right? Where He is speaking to you. Man, there are opportunities for you to do the same for someone else. Samuel is being raised up. And everybody in the nation's taking notice. Something's happening. We're going to get to the fall and the rise. But God has done all the back work. And it's an invitation for every one of us. Because God is working in your lives as well. He's done a lot of back work. He's taking you through some things. And there may be some opportunities even this week where He's inviting you to participate. What is your response to Him? Will you get up and run? Will you sit and listen? Will you obey when asked? Let's pray. Father, we thank you for the call on Samuel's life, for the story of this child with whom you were very patient, even in that night of calling him. But you were patient in allowing him to sit under Eli. And you were ordaining his steps, that he would experience the things that he did, so that when he came to that night, he would come to know you in a more real and more personal way. So that he would live a life of obedient response to you. Even as he had modeled that with his earthly master, that he would do that with his heavenly master. Father, in this room, each one of us have had things that have happened in our lives. Things that we have grown from. Things that we have seen and been able to experience. Things that have shaped us and prepared us. Things that we still maybe need to deal with even as we become more prepared. And yet, for every one of us, we know that we're not just called to salvation. We're called to living out the gospel in our lives. We're called to be in a relationship with you, that we have a confidence when you lead us in our lives, that you speak into our lives, that we live that out in the lives that you have given us to live. Whether that's being a witness or whether that's being an advocate of truth, whether that is being someone who comes alongside and gives comfort and provides hope, whether that's someone living out the gospel in a way that sees victory and courage over failure, defeat, fear, shame, one that recognizes the work of Christ and points others to Him. Father, help us to be the people that are quick to respond, quick to have confidence that you have spoken in our lives, and quick to obey. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.